It matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. And as always, we have plenty coming up today. Is something bold happening in the NHS? Is it bold enough for you? Would you like the UK to be dodging a recession? And is Harry's royal reputation in tatters? Or is there a way back? But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here is Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's midday. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has described the execution of a British-Iranian national in Iran as barbaric. Rishi Sunak said the killing of Ali Reza Akbari was a callous and cowardly act. Mr Akbari was sentenced to death on charges of spying for Britain. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has summoned the Iranian chargé d'affaires to make clear the government's disgust. A union representing ambulance workers has written to the Prime Minister saying they feel betrayed by attempts to paint them as uncaring. GMB, which represents more than 10,000 ambulance staff, told Rishi Sunak he was demonising them over strike action. It comes after Mr Sunak told the Commons that industrial action was terrifying the public. Tory MP Lee Anderson told Esther and Phil earlier the letter may not reflect the views of the workers.
There's a distinction here, Phil, and you know this, between ambulance drivers and ambulance unions. You know, I've spent times a shift with ambulance drivers, and they, you know, sometimes they tell me a different story to what the unions are telling them. It's about time we started listening to the ambulance drivers and the paramedics rather than the unions, who we know has got one single agenda, and that's to get rid of us.
Nursing strikes have been paused in Scotland after talks between First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and the Royal College of Nursing. Negotiations will now continue next week with the aim of reaching a deal by the end of February. The Scottish Government is also pledging to match any NHS pay increase in England if it's higher. RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen credits pressure from nurses as being key to negotiations moving forward. Rishi Sunak has spoken of his ambition to send a squadron of British tanks to help Ukraine take back territory lost to Russian forces. Speaking with President Zelensky this morning, he pledged to supply Challenger 2 battle tanks alongside additional artillery systems. The decision makes the UK the first Western power to supply main battle tanks to the country. Plans to house 400 asylum seekers in a small village near Northampton have now been dropped by the Home Office. Residents had objected to using the 17th century Highgate House Hotel in Cretan, which has a population of just 520. James Hill is the chairman of Cretan Parish Council. He told us why residents were against the scheme.
We're a village of 520 people, and the prospect of 400 people coming to live here without occupation or activities to keep them occupied, without proper access to local services, we felt that was unsustainable for us as a community and also for the local area.
Ministers are set to review guidance given to landlords who rent out social housing following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 after developing a respiratory condition caused by mould. Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, which owned the flat, had previously advised his parents to paint over it. Michael Gove says every landlord in the country needs to ensure their tenants are housed in decent homes. Hormone replacement therapy could help prevent Alzheimer's disease in women, according to new research. The therapy helps control the symptoms of menopause and provides better memory and cognitive function for women who carry the Alzheimer's gene. Professor June Andrews is a dementia expert. She told us it's really too early to know how significant this could be.
All the research indicates that there's some kind of link there. There's not anything yet to say that taking HRT is really going to prevent dementia. If it was going to prevent dementia, that would be really important. But the thing is, there's a chance that it might be associated with a reduction. And when you consider that taking HRT does present some risks and it has some side effects, it wouldn't be worth taking it just...
The government says single-use plastic plates, trays and cutlery will be banned in England from October in a bid to curb the impact of plastic on the environment. At the moment, England uses around 2.7 billion pieces of single-use cutlery per year, and only 10% is recycled. Repeated breaches of the new legislation could lead to retailers and food vendors facing criminal charges. Dr. Christian Dunn, a senior lecturer in natural sciences at Bangor University, told us why the ban is necessary.
Plastic doesn't break down, doesn't decompose, doesn't rot away. And what happens to it is it breaks up into smaller and smaller pieces of plastics, which then become microplastics or even nanoplastics. And now what we're seeing is those plastics are so small and they're being found everywhere. They're in the rain, they're in the air that we're breathing in, they're even in our blood.
You're watching GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Alistair.
So something is afoot in the NHS, but is it what you want? And something is afoot in the economy, and is it what you fear, or perhaps is it not what you need to be too worried about? Before we drill deep into all of those with my selection of guests, I'm delighted to say that we are joined live in the studio by Catherine Forster, who is our political correspondent, because, as they say, a week is a long time in politics, and a lot of it features one Boris Johnson, who famously said on the steps of Downing Street when he was elected Prime Minister, "We will resolve the care crisis once and for all." And lo and behold, Rishi Sunak finds an awful lot of money to go to the care sector and say, tell you what, we're going to buy a whole stack of places from you to help reduce waiting lists, which was one of his famous pledges, and try and get the NHS hospitals up and running. We'll be talking about that a great deal. So is Boris in play, as Nadine Dorris wrote last weekend, and Dan Hodges said, I think if I remember rightly, actually Boris is the only person that Sir Keir Starmer and Labour fear?
Well, there's been a lot of very excited chat about Boris Johnson this week, hasn't there? His portrait as former Prime Minister was unveiled at the Carlton Club the other night. There's a group of MPs led by Lord Cruddas, who is a big Brexit backer, a big Tory party donor, wanting to bring back Boris. The Conservative Democratic Organisation keen to give more power back to the members. Lots of speculation that if the May elections go badly, a possible return, that Boris Johnson might create problems over the protocol. But really, the Conservative Party got rid of Boris Johnson last year. The MPs decided that he had become a liability. Yes, he'd won them an 80-seat majority. It's astonishing, the turnaround. But would they really, having got rid of Boris Johnson, having got rid of Liz Truss, then get rid of another Prime Minister before a general election? How would that look? I know there's many people convinced that Boris Johnson is the answer, but at the time that MPs rebelled and he had to go, about 2/3 of the public thought at that point that he should resign.
But at that Carlton talk, apart from the portrait being unveiled, he also said if we are Conservatives, we've got to start cutting taxes again. And Rishi, in the New Year speech, famously said, well, I'm not going to tell Jeremy Hunt what to do, and you may well have to wait until spring. There's an important piece in the Times today as well that says that the Liz Truss and the Kwasi Kwarteng group, as it were, have not given up on having that ideology there at the heart of what the Tory has to offer as a party at the next general election. So it is all in play, both intellectually and in terms of personalities, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, the Conservative Party is not a united party. Rishi Sunak is saying if we're united, we can do anything. Famously, we know that voters don't vote for divided parties. But it is, Rishi Sunak is governing a coalition, really, isn't he, of factions. There's the Johnsonites, there's the Trussites, people like Environment Secretary under Truss, Ranil Jayawardena, the Levelling Up Secretary, Simon Clarke. They're getting together a group of Conservative MPs. They're determined that her agenda of supply-side reforms and encouraging growth shouldn't be jettisoned, and working together to see how they can bring that.
Well, that's our
about.
other big discussion a bit later on, which is how we perhaps narrowly avoided really being deep in the doo-doo of recession
so
with the numbers that came out on Friday. Some big money following Boris Johnson. Christopher Harborne, who's given a lot of money to Brexit Party before and backs people he thinks are winners within the Conservative Party, but some row and discussion as well about whether or not Boris Johnson is safe in Uxbridge. Rishi Sunak says that's where he's staying. His friends say he may need a safer seat.
Well, he's got a majority of 7,000, hasn't he? So on current projections, he'd be very likely to lose that seat. There's been speculation that he might be given a safer seat in exchange for supporting Rishi Sunak. Now, Rishi Sunak was asked about this up in Scotland, and he said very clearly, no, Boris Johnson has said he's standing in Uxbridge, which, of course, he has said that, but we know that things do change and change very quickly sometimes. So I would say watch this space. But the £1 million donation that we heard about yesterday, it's been made clear that that's gone to Boris Johnson's office. For what purpose? We're not quite sure. Some speculation, as you say, about former leadership ambition, but that it's not his money to spend, although, of course, he's doing very well because he's earned over £1 million with speeches and some estimates that he might make £5 million a year because, let's face it, he does have a way with words that no successor can match.
Still has a huge footprint on the world stage as well and is planning to pop off again to see Zelensky's chum in Kyiv.
Yes, he is apparently front page of the Independent, Lord Dannatt, former head of the British Army, basically saying, please don't go there. It's courting publicity. It's not going to be helpful. Don't undermine the Prime Minister. But of course, Boris Johnson does feel part of his legacy is that Britain came out very strongly in support of Ukraine. Early on, they were a massive support, and he has a very close relationship with President Zelensky. Now, Rishi Sunak's made it clear that he wants to continue that, but obviously it's hard for Boris Johnson. That's something that he can say that, you know, they did the right thing, and he feels very proud of that. It's not easy for him to step away. So whether we will see him popping up, watch this space. But certainly I'm sure Rishi Sunak would rather that he
Final
wouldn't.
quick one. It was in Ray's news bulletin about the ambulance drivers being cross about being accused of being boat rockers and what have you, but they made it crystal clear that they do not accept one of Rishi Sunak's bold and radical moves, which is to demand minimum levels of cover during strikes for safety reasons. Neither the ambulance drivers support that, nor do the junior doctors, interestingly, who are balloting right now on the possibility of joining strike action too. Will Sunak blink?
I doubt it. I suspect the government probably will ultimately move a little bit on pay. Steve Barclay has privately said to have accepted that they probably will have to do something on pay in the current year.
A la Scotland.
Although, those strikes have currently been called off because they're negotiating. I think the minimum safety levels, as the government like to call it, minimum service, anti-strike legislation, the government are keen to say it's not going to stop strikes, is likely to go through the Commons because, of course, it was a manifesto pledge, although it's been broadened since then. It might come unstuck in the Lords. The unions are going to take legal action. But, of course, they do have similar legislation in much of Europe, in France, in Germany, in Italy. blue light services do have to provide a minimum level of cover. And Rishi Sunak saying last week, it's terrifying that if you needed an ambulance on a strike day, you couldn't be sure of getting it. But of course, at the moment, with the terrible wait times that we heard on Thursday of an hour and a half average for a Category 2 heart attack or stroke call, there's no guarantee that you're going to get an ambulance when you need it on any day of the week, which is really a dreadful state of affairs that the NHS is now in.
Well, we shall have a lot more about all of that with my guests very, very shortly. But for the time being, Catherine, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for giving us all of that brilliant background on what's happening at the top of the Conservative Party and the ever-fascinating Boris Johnson. See you later on, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed. Catherine Foster, GB News political correspondent. Now, as both of us were saying there, and as I dropped in every now and then within our conversation, the crisis in the NHS of waiting times and staff shortages, which indeed Catherine mentioned there in her summing up, was such in the Prime Minister's mind that he made action to reduce waiting lists one of his 5 pledges in that New Year speech. What's more, he summoned the great and the good of the health service to number 10 Downing Street for round-table talks, as they say, although the actual cabinet table's more like a wing than a circle, but there you go, declaring that, and I quote, "business as usual simply won't do. But bold and radical action is required, and it is required now." Well, thus far, some glimmers, perhaps, of hope. Legislation, as Catherine and I were just discussing, is promised to ensure minimum levels of service for safety. In addition, more deals with the private sector to get operations done there, courtesy of the taxpayer, reducing your wait time if you're waiting for an operation, and reducing the bed blocking and the waiting time for hospitals more generally. But perhaps the most radical initiative was the decision to bulk purchase spare capacity in the private care sector to find room, yet again, for so-called bed blockers, folk who've been made as well as possible by the NHS, and certainly well enough by the NHS to leave hospital because they no longer need any more medical attention, but what they do need is post-operative care. And government's assessment is that some of that is available in the private sector, and so using your money and mine, they will purchase rather a lot of it. Now, with medical thinkers and care leaders, we're going to assess whether those moves are good, whether they are practical, and whether they are potentially efficacious and will assist us all. The latest data from the NHS suggests that there has been a modest decline in some waiting lists, but a worsening in ambulance waiting times, as Catherine indeed was just saying, and within accident and emergency. Plus, the Financial Times reports that Britons are turning to private healthcare as the NHS crisis worsens. Now, you may like to read Matthew Peris's piece in the Times today, which says, finds that all terribly embarrassing to have to go private. But there you go. If you've got the money, then you get the operation. Maybe that's what he finds embarrassing, because it does look a little bit like queue jumping. But, you know, maybe it is actually part and parcel of the whole deal. At best, then, it is a work in progress, but thank goodness me for that. Now, we would love to hear your views, especially personal experiences of all of it. Just get in touch on gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet at gbnews, or me, go on Facebook, any of our social media outlets. We genuinely would like to know what your personal experiences are, and if you've got some absolutely brilliant, bold and radical idea that neither Steve Barclay nor the Prime Minister have come up with yet, then let us know. We will, I promise faithfully, to pass it on. And I'm delighted to say that my first guest, who has been a regular on the programme from the days of the pandemic, now finds herself there again, ready to talk to us, which is terrific, and is, of course, once again on the front line. She is the Executive Chair of the National Care Association, Nadra Ahmed, and there she is. My first question is, before this hit the newspapers and the news bulletins, did someone have the courtesy to pick up the phone to you and say, will this work?
Good afternoon. Well, I think conversations have been going on quite quite a bit about what should work and what could work. And we've been talking consistently about investment in social care. We knew we had capacity, but it is the investment that we needed to enable us to pay our staff properly so that we could retain the staff that we have currently working with us, but also so we could recruit people. We have had the visa application scheme opened up, and so there are people coming in from abroad. So we've got international recruitment going on. So we knew that would all help. We've been on the front line saying we can support the NHS, but nothing has been terribly forthcoming. There have been announcements of 500 million on a discharge fund, which sadly hasn't seen the kind of frontline activity increase in any way. We are very concerned as a sector and as individuals about people who are remaining in hospital longer than they really need to.
Well, quite extraordinary, the scale of it, because in the Times newspaper and elsewhere, Amanda Pritchard, the chief executive of the NHS, says that recently they found that there were 130,000 folk occupying hospital beds who simply shouldn't be there. 130,000 is an enormous number. I'm slightly jaw-dropped at the fact that nobody bothered to sit down with you and try and work out the detail of it, and I take your point about pay, because if they can get it right, it's a huge boost to your sector and the people for whom you speak so eloquently.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it would make such a difference if the investment was there, because care at home for those people who want to go back home has suffered enormously under this because of the workforce crisis, because there you need more people going in and doing the visits locally all around the country. In care homes, we've struggled with the staffing, as you know. So that investment is the key to it. But also alongside that, and I'm really pleased to know that somebody did pick up the phone to me days before the announcements were due. And I did say to them, one of the things you're going to have to look at is the wraparound service, because it's not about just discharging people out of hospital into a care setting or into their own homes. If we don't have the wraparound community service, so if they need additional mental health support, or they need a GP to come in, a district nurse to come in to support them, or indeed physios, they have to be available, because we see failings of discharges. And, you know, just in 1 week, I was told about from a care company, a home care company, they had 8 failed discharges out of hospital, which is devastating for the individuals that were sent out of hospital and then actually had to go back into hospital because the services weren't available to support them in their services. So we've got to get the whole thing right. This is not just about part of it. This is about the whole thing.
And it's interesting because that is so clear on the table already, where even people like Mr. Barclay will say one of the problems about bed blocking is that they're as fit as the hospital can make them, but the care package, which you've just so eloquently described, is not available. The fact that there may be a room and or a bed in the private sector that they're happy to buy from you doesn't mean to say that there will be that care package, which is the existing problem.
Absolutely. The care package is essential, and that will include community services. And the other thing that is slightly worrying me at the moment is about this block booking beds. I think we've got to be really careful here, because you can block book 20 beds in a care setting, in maybe a corporate care setting, probably not in the smaller providers. They wouldn't be able to be viable if they had 20 beds to let go. But if you block book those beds, what you're then doing is you're paying for them whether somebody's in it or not. So I think that is a bit of a worry for me, because we need to have this local picture where a hospital can actually buy that space with all the services, and none of it is going to waste, because this money is very precious. It's not a huge amount of money. Let's be absolutely clear about that. And it's only till the 31st of March. What happens after that? Because you could take in additional staff to do some support work there, which will be a very short-term employment proposal. Again, not a great way of doing it. Sustainability is the key to us getting this right. We really need to be very, very clear that people who no longer need to be in hospital and are occupying an acute bed should be able to be transferred into an interim arrangement until they are ready to go back into their own homes and a package can be brought in, or they are made permanent residents into a care service, whichever is best for them. We mustn't forget that there is an individual at the end of that process who will be impacted. And I lost my father at Christmas, and it was a poor discharge that led to it. He was discharged on a Friday night. No GP had been put into place to support him. By Saturday, when I saw him 3 weeks ago today, he was fine. He was chatting, but there was something not quite right because he had water coming out of his mouth, and there was something not quite right. By Sunday, he was pretty much in a terrible state. Monday morning, blue lighted back into hospital, and the infection was still there that he'd gone in with. So I think it's got to be right. Let's get the GPs in place. Let's make sure we've got the district nurses. All of that needs to happen. My father lost his life, but he was at a good age. I'm worried about people who could be saved. That revolving door and A&E is not somewhere that we want to be. We want to make informed, considered discharges that are in the best interest of the individual.
Nadra Ahmed, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for finding time to do that once again for us here on what is an absolutely fascinating story. You gave such a clear picture of what the real challenge is. It is bold and radical, but it needs perhaps to be thought absolutely through. Nadra there, the executive chair of the National Care Association. I'm delighted now to be touching base with another regular, former Conservative Member of Parliament and indeed former Health Secretary, Stephen Dorrell. There he is. Stephen, great to see you. Very good afternoon to you. I hope you could hear everything that Nadra was saying there. Utterly intriguing. She welcomes it. It is potentially really bold and radical. They do have the space, but it hasn't been completely thought through so that they surround the people that they can give accommodation to with the care package that is not available elsewhere. I give her 10 out of 10 for that. What do you give her?
10 out of 10, 11 out of 10, if I could, Alistair. I heard every word she spoke. And I know Nadra, and I think she set out the position with admirable clarity. Can I make one very tiny point, but I think it illustrates a big issue, that throughout that interview with Nadra, the note on the bottom of your screen said NHS reform. What you were actually talking about with Nadra is the proposition that you can't deal with NHS reform unless you deal with the issues of social care. Addressing social care is fundamental to making the NHS sustainable, and it's the failure of successive governments to address the priorities of social care which is the biggest single factor undermining the sustainability of the NHS today.
Is there a real problem here, as the Telegraph leader suggests today, that the party that you formerly served and represented has lost its nerve to be bold and radical, as the Prime Minister demanded of the NHS, and that it's actually Wes Streeting for Labour who's talking about more radical, genuinely open-minded reform of both how health and how care operate? Need to go back to Beveridge, need to see what's happened over the last 5 decades, and almost dare to consider starting again.
Well, I'm not in favour of starting again. I think in an earlier conversation, you and I had this debate, Alistair. We need to remember that the latest changes in NHS bureaucracy actually are only just over 6 months old. They came in on the 1st of July. And on the 1st of July of last year. And as it happens, I think they're an important step in the right direction, which is to set up a single structure to bring together social care and the NHS to address some of the issues I was just mentioning. But on the other hand, I also agree with a great deal of what Wes Streeting has been saying recently. And it would be good to see a Secretary of State in office thinking about how you take forward the repositioning of health and social care as a single sector. I make the obvious point that you can't do that without addressing the pay issues that are currently a dispute between the unions and the government. It's odd to me, or it's not odd, it's inconceivable to me that you can be trying to think about the future of health and social care without addressing the fact that we currently have unprecedented levels of vacancies in both the NHS and in social care. And surely that tells us something about the terms and conditions and the position in which these people, the committed professional people, are expected to deliver the quality services we all want to see.
Yeah, fascinating. The flip side of that coin, it's not only nurses, as we've often talked about on this programme, and indeed Amanda, the chief executive of the NHS, splashed front page Times, their lead. We need to train more doctors. We need to recruit more people here in the UK. We need to stop bringing in people from abroad. That applies to nurses. The old party needs to reconsider the bursaries, etc., etc. It is hugely about staffing levels, conditions, and yes, I accept pay.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's about all of those things. The one thing that I think is a trap in that presentation of the issues, as you just did then, Alistair, is to imagine that somehow we can have a British-only solution to these clinical professions. The fact is there is a worldwide shortage of doctors and nurses, and the NHS has always trained people who've gone to work overseas and has always welcomed people trained overseas to come and work in the NHS. And I think it's important that we continue to maintain that open door, because otherwise what we end up with is a position where the NHS is somehow cut off from developments elsewhere in the world. And that's no basis on which to develop what is at its roots a scientific service.
Stephen, great to talk to you, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Stephen Dorrell there, former Conservative Member of Parliament and indeed Health Secretary. Well, we promised you an honest and open and radical exploration of what the Prime Minister's talking about and what Mr Barclay is talking about. And you've certainly had it so far from the care sector and from a former Tory Health Secretary. We would love to hear what you think, particularly if you're a patient disappointed, if you're a resident disappointed, whatever it might be. Let us know what your experiences are. And if you've got any brilliant ideas, chuck them in as well, and we will share them with the rest of the people who are kind enough to be watching and listening to our conversations here on GB News. You are indeed listening and watching Alastair Stewart and Friends, with lots more coming up on today's programme. A protest is being held in Hull today over concerns unsuitable sites are being used by the government to house migrants. GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley has that story. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
"12:33, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has described the execution of a British-Iranian national in Iran as barbaric. Rishi Sunak said the killing of Ali Reza Akbari was a callous and cowardly act. Mr Akbari was sentenced to death on charges of spying for Britain. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has summoned the Iranian chargé d'affaires to make clear the government's disgust. A union representing ambulance workers has written to the Prime Minister saying they feel betrayed by attempts to paint them as uncaring. GMB, which represents more than 10,000 ambulance staff, told Rishi Sunak he was demonising them over strike action. It comes after Mr Sunak told the Commons that industrial action was terrifying the public. Rishi Sunak has spoken of his ambition to send a squadron of British tanks to help Ukraine take back territory lost to Russian forces. Speaking with President Zelensky this morning, he pledged to supply Challenger 2 battle tanks alongside additional artillery systems. The decision makes the UK the first Western power to supply main battle tanks to the country. Plans to house 400 asylum seekers in a small village near Northampton have now been dropped by the Home Office. Residents had objected to using the 17th century Highgate House Hotel in Cretan, which has a population of just 520. James Hill is the chairman of the parish council there. He told us why residents were against the scheme.
We're a village of 520 people, and the prospect of 400 people coming to live here without occupation or activities to keep them occupied, without proper access to local services, we felt that was unsustainable for us as a community and also for the local area.
We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. As I said just before Ray's bulletin there, a protest is being held in Hull today over concerns that unsuitable sites, so say the protesters, are being used by the government to house migrants. But the Home Office have been forced to abandon plans to house 400 asylum seekers in a Northamptonshire hotel following a campaign by local residents highlighted by GB News. Highgate House in Cretan was going to be used as asylum contingency accommodation. What a terribly inelegant way of describing it, but that's how they do indeed describe it. But the Daventry Member of Parliament and indeed Government Minister Chris Heaton-Harris has informed West Northamptonshire Council that the Home Office has now changed its criteria and the local hotel is no longer considered appropriate. GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley is indeed in Hull for us now and has the story. So many different facets to this, people power and, of course, something very much to the front of people's minds. Have we got Anna? Anna, can you hear me? OK, we have a little problem there. We will come back to Anna there later on. We also have a report, I think, from James Hill. So we will get back to that when we have sorted out whatever the problem was there between us and Anna Riley, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter. Now, I asked you at the very beginning of the programme if you would get in touch on our big topic of the day, the NHS reforms and also the economy. So Eileen chooses to begin the conversation. She's talking about the NHS. Sometimes when things have gone so far wrong, the only way is to start again. But to achieve that, we may have to use more private healthcare to get there gradually. Well, that's kind of what's happening, and I just underline what Stephen Dorrell, who's a been-there-done-it guy and actually run the health service for a wee while, said maybe not a complete tearing up of the sheet of paper, but reforms are certainly vital, and it's crucial to deal with the health service and the care system at the same time. But thank you very much indeed for that contribution. Roger says it is the management of the National Health Service and many other public bodies that need so many bureaucrats in control, whose priority is to expand that bureaucracy. We were doing perfectly well until professional management was introduced. Dave joins the conversation, says the only way forward is to form a national all-party cabinet to sort it out once and for all. Now, that's very interesting, given that Stephen Dorrell, a former Tory, said what sense Wes Streeting for Labour was making on the idea of NHS reform and recovery. So, great minds, perhaps. There's a thought there, and we're grateful to Dave for raising it as well. John says that's a start, but the NHS needs root and branch reform. It is not fit for the 21st century. Stop treating it as a religion and ignore those that do. Keep your views coming in, please, and subscribe, of course, to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News. There you can see the full uninterrupted interview with Stephen Dorrell and with Nadia as well, from the very front line of the care sector, saying it's a great idea, but we need to think out a little more broadly there. So that's YouTube, and we are GB News. So keep those thoughts coming in. And in a wee while, we'll be talking about the economic data that came out on Friday and how close the United Kingdom is to a recession, or indeed how close the UK is to recovery. Love you to get in touch on that subject. I've got some great guests coming up on that to hear what their views are. One is one of the top commentators, and the others are people who are trying to run businesses out there, out on the front line. Now, talking of those economic numbers, one of the great boosts to the little bit of growth that there was the hospitality sector. And more than 250 pubs were entered into this year's Pub of the Year competition. I don't know if contribution to GDP was one of the criteria. Perhaps it should have been. But, of course, only one could be the winner. And it has been announced that the Tamworth Tap in Staffordshire has won that award. So we sent our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson along to enjoy a pint at Britain's best boozer.
On this quiet street, in this quiet town, sits Pub of the Year. Under the watchful eye of Tamworth Castle, the Tamworth Tap has been named by the Campaign for Real Ales the best in the country. Owner George Greenaway can't quite believe it.
Incredible. Absolutely ecstatic. I've just been bursting, but I'm so proud, immensely proud of the achievement of obviously myself and the whole team and ultimately the whole town, really.
Tell me a bit about the work that's had to go in to create such a place like this.
Yeah. It's been a lot of toil, really has, but you're just spurred on. All those positive reactions you get from creating something from that starting point, bit by bit, as you go through the course of the last 5 years, just spurs you on to the next week and the next week, and it just snowballed.
Pubs in the competition are selected by CAMRA volunteers and are judged on their atmosphere, decor, welcome, service, community focus, and the quality of the beer. The Tap went from an empty premises to a brew pub in less than 5 years, and today boasts 8 hand pools, including at least one Tamworth Ale brewed on site. For CAMRA National Chairman Nick Antona, it wasn't just the beer here that made this place stand out from the rest. Although it is very good.
It's only been in existence 5 years, and it's demonstrated in those 5 years that you don't have to be an established pub site to be the best pub. It's it's grown. It's very much part of Tamworth's community. They refer to the tappers, the Tamworth tappers, which is what they actually know, the customers who go in the Tamworth tap, and they are very much part of the family now. They embrace their community and have delivered a high quality experience.
More than 32 pubs a month are estimated to have closed in 2022, with increases in bills and a drop in consumer demand, meaning they had no choice but to close their doors. This pub knows how important the community is to their survival.
Ultimately, it is about the local communities getting behind their pubs and supporting them and celebrating them and using them, and they'll be rewarded with that atmosphere and accolades such as this.
Today, the Tamworth Tap will officially be presented with their award, with people across the country coming to grab a pint at the pub that has raised the bar. Jack Carson, GB News.
Well done, Jack. Thank you very much indeed. And Jack only had that one pint, I hasten to add. But congratulations to all involved. And lovely to hear how important it is to the whole community coming together to support it. And I love those wooden taps that were there up on the display. Now, before we got that update on the Pub of the Year, which I found absolutely fascinating, and I hope you did as well, unfortunately, we did have a little technical hiccup with Anna Riley, which we have now been able to rectify. GB News' Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley is there in Hull as she was all along. We just couldn't link up, which was a real drag. And there she is, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, with that extraordinary row and intervention by a local MP who happens to be Secretary for Northern Ireland as well, about where asylum seekers and migrants can be housed and at what cost. Give us the background, because this is one of those edgy stories with so many different angles on it, Anna, and I know Amanda, I know you all over it.
Completely, Alistair. There's many different facets to it, isn't there? There's obviously the Home Office that have got a bill of 6.8 million people per day to house asylum seekers in hotels. So it's a government plan to use areas such as disused army bases, disused student accommodation to house asylum seekers while their claims are processed. You've also got people like David Davis, the MP that I was speaking to, saying we need to sort of stop this problem at the source rather than putting up asylum seekers. More needs to be done on the channel to stop these small boat crossings coming over. And then you've got people that live in villages such as in Cottingham, where the story I've been covering, that are sort of caught in the middle of this as such. So the background to this protest that will be happening in Hull a little later today is that the University of Hull were in talks with the Home Office to sell former student accommodation, the Lawns, to them to house up to over in excess of 1,000 asylum seekers. Now, in a village of 20,000, the people in Cottingham were saying they just didn't feel like it was the right area to house asylum seekers. They said they didn't feel that there were right facilities in place. Locals were telling me they already find it hard to get a GP appointment, so if there's an influx of more people to the village, they're going to find that harder. And they also had safety concerns as well. They said, are these people necessarily vetted? They were little concerned about that as well. So all these concerns came to a head. They had a public meeting in which it was decided that they would write to the university expressing all their concerns, which they did, and then they also went ahead and had a protest through the village centre last weekend. Over 500 people turned out to oppose the sale of the Lawns to the Home Office, and through what they call people power, they said that the university backed down, and the Home Office also confirmed that they would not be buying that land to house asylum seekers. Now, this protest today, though, is of that larger issue, and it's not just in Hull, of course. We've heard from the chairman of Cretan Parish Council, James Hill. He spoke to GB News about the unsustainability of the plans for a hotel in his area being used, and this is what he had to say.
We're a village of 520 people, and the prospect of 400 people coming to live here without occupation or activities to keep them occupied without proper access to local services, we felt that was unsustainable for us as a community and also for the local area.
So those plans in Cretan were dropped with the public coming together, working with the council, and the same has happened in Cottingham. But of course we do still have people crossing the channel and they do need to have accommodation.
Anna Riley there and guest, thank you both very much indeed. As I said, it is an important story, multifaceted, and as you rightly said, an element of people power there, which is something we very much like here on GB News, the People's Channel. So thank you very much indeed. Sorry there was a hiccup earlier on. Brilliantly recovered, Anna, and thank you very much indeed for your report. Anna Riley there, GB News' Yorkshire and Humber reporter with that intriguing story. If you've got something like that going on in your neck of the woods, let us know and we will share that and we will look into it as well. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including at least 250,000 people are recorded as homeless in England, and the situation is set to get worse. So say many of the leading homeless charities. And we will be discussing that next with one that I've been associated with for quite some time. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Alistair Stewart and Friends, and I'm delighted to say that the next guest is certainly a good friend of mine. I've been involved in Crisis, the homeless charity, for almost longer than I can remember. I actually began with Crisis at Christmas. That was the very first thing I ever got involved in. How was this year? Demand up, as those figures that we spotted in the newspapers just a couple of days ago suggesting it is on the rise and it is deeply worrying. What did that event tell you?
Yeah, so homelessness is definitely on the rise. We did have some good years through the pandemic, actually, where we saw numbers go down, but they're going up again. This is the very sharp end of the cost of living crisis, as you can imagine. And Crisis operates services all year round, as you know, so 10,000 people will come to us. But over the winter period, and particularly Christmas, we'll open various centres, including hotels, and some of them are still running. We're running them till the end of January this year. Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is there's so many people needing help. And as soon as we opened our doors in our hotels, the waiting list was double the number of people that we could see. And it is really unlike anything I've seen in recent years in terms of the numbers coming to us.
I mentioned to you when you sat down that the 250,000 number was in some shelter data that had been produced, and then, I mean, in a sense, you were in competition, but it's, thank God, it's one of those sectors where everybody works together to try and defeat the same problem. Another thing that shelter did highlight, though, was a rise in the number of women. Sharp rise in the number of women who are becoming homeless at the moment.
Yeah, so there is a rise in the number of women, there's a rise in the number of young people, a rise in the number of older people. It's everything. What we're seeing is particularly people just cannot afford to pay their rent. So the numbers of people who just come to us and say, actually, I never thought homelessness would happen to me, but my rent's gone up, or I simply can't afford the 12 or 15% increase. What do I do? And we're not talking about people that, as I say, ever thought they were anywhere near this ever happening to them. And that is happening to women, to various different groups.
It's always been at the heart of the crisis philosophy as well, that you don't just seek to keep people in safety or put a roof over their heads, but also to skill them up, to support them, to give them the possibility of an alternative life that may then earn them enough to pay that rent, which has suddenly become a problem. Is that still the mantra?
Yeah, so the opposite of homelessness is a person reaching their potential. It's not simply having a roof over their head. So what we do is make sure that people have a home, not just temporary accommodation, but the skills they need to rebuild their lives, get jobs, rebuild relationships, because actually no one needs to be defined by something awful that happened to them. The answer is to get off the streets or out of hostels, out of night shelters, and get on with your life.
Well, I'm glad you do it all, and do give my very best wishes to all at Crisis and all of the good people you work with that in mind. And great to see you, Matt. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Matt Downey there, CEO of Crisis. And my next guest, you will understand completely, makes perfect sense, given that last bit of our little conversation, is someone who understands exactly the struggles of homelessness after spending 6 months homeless, but who managed to turn it all around for himself in a way not unlike Matt just described. After spending 6 months as homeless, joining me now is businessman and podcaster Nathan Keeder, who's been on the programme before. Nathan, great to see you again. Thank you very much indeed. What was the magic formula that helped you turn it round from being someone who suddenly got hit in the face by homelessness and found a new way of making your life work and making it a success? What was the key?
Rolling your sleeves up and doing the hard work. It really is that simple. You know, keep your circle small, do the hard work and get out of it. There is definitely support out there for you. You've just got to go and find it.
And Matt was just saying that a number of the homeless charities will do it, but is there also help and support from local authorities, from officialdom, as it were, rather than the voluntary sector?
Well, I think the simplest thing is recycle the homes that are currently empty. There's 80,000 homes in London that are empty as it stands. Why can't we recycle those homes? And probably the reason why is because there's no incentives for private landlords to do that.
How fascinating. Well, let's add that to our radical and bold agenda for today. Nathan, great to see you again. Thank you very much indeed. And once more, listening to that, Matt, thank you very much. Great to have a live, vibrant, kicking example of exactly what you were saying.
The answer here is
cheers. See you later, guys. Take care. Bye.
Nathan, thank you very much indeed. So there we are, the view from the top at Crisis, but also the view from a man who's been there and done it, which I'm delighted to say is just a great success. So hurrah for all of that. Thank you very much indeed for watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GBNews TV and radio. Let's bring you right up to date now with the weekend weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, after we lose the wind and rain today, a change is in the forecast. We will start to turn quite cold, especially from Sunday onwards. So here's the situation at the moment. We've still got low pressure dominating the British Isles, and the tightly packed isobars here indicating some very windy weather this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England. Quite blustery elsewhere, actually, and once we lose this rain across eastern England this afternoon, for much of England and Wales, Northern Ireland, really it's an afternoon of sunny spells and scattered showers. Very different story for Scotland. A band of persistent rain really lingering for most of the afternoon, and that rain will turn to hill snow across the mountains of Scotland. Quite cold here. Further south, we may just cling on to double figures throughout the afternoon in the far southeast. Into this evening, continuation of clear spells and showers for much of England and Wales. Further north, this band of rain and hail snow will slowly sink its way southwards into Northern Ireland and Northern England as the night goes on. Behind it, some clear skies developing, and under the clear skies it will turn quite cold, risk of some frost and also some icy stretches. Further south, a colder night than of late, but still probably hanging on to temperatures into 3 to 4 degrees. Into Sunday, a colder day for most of us. We will see this band of rain and maybe also some hill snow continue to track its way southwards, but weakening as it does so. Behind it, it does turn quite a good deal sunnier. Still the risk of some wintry showers and quite a keen wind across northeastern Scotland, so feeling quite cold here. Further south, a colder day than of late, but maybe nearer to average for the far south of England. And then as we go into the week ahead, it is going to be quite a cold week for most of us, an increase in risk of frost by night and also some snow.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, welcome if you've just joined us. Hello, and thank you very much indeed if you've been with us since noon. I'm Alastair Stewart, and we are into the second hour of our programme, keeping you company here on TV and radio, with plenty more still to come, including are we heading into a recession? Are we already in one? And has Prince Harry made the royal family more popular? Shock horror, a couple of fascinating polls out and about. We'll be talking to an image consultant about where Harry has left himself and his family. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here's Ray Addison.
Good afternoon. 1 minute past one. Here's the latest. The Prime Minister has described the execution of a British-Iranian national in Iran as barbaric. Rishi Sunak said the killing of Ali Reza Akbari was a callous and cowardly act. Mr Akbari was sentenced to death on charges of spying for Britain. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has summoned the Iranian chargé d'affaires to make clear the government's disgust. Amnesty International says the execution shows how pitifully little respect Iran has for human life. A union representing ambulance workers has written to the Prime Minister saying they feel betrayed by attempts to paint them as uncaring. GMB, which represents more than 10,000 ambulance staff, told Rishi Sunak he was demonising them over strike action. Comes after Mr Sunak told the Commons that industrial action was terrifying the public. Tory MP Lee Anderson told Esther and Phil earlier the letter may not reflect the views of the workers.
Well, there's a distinction here, Phil, and you know this, between ambulance drivers and ambulance unions. You know, I've spent times a shift with ambulance drivers, and they, you know, sometimes they tell me a different story to what the unions are telling them. It's about time we started listening to the ambulance drivers and the paramedics rather than the unions, who we know have got one single agenda, and that's to get rid of us.
Nursing strikes have been paused in Scotland after talks between First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and the Royal College of Nursing. Negotiations will now continue next week with the aim of reaching a deal by the end of February. The Scottish Government is also pledging to match any NHS pay increase in England if it's higher. RCN General Secretary Pat Cullen credits pressure from nurses as being key to negotiations. Rishi Sunak has spoken of his ambition to send a squadron of British tanks to help Ukraine take back territory lost to Russian forces. Speaking with President Zelensky this morning, he pledged to supply Challenger 2 battle tanks alongside additional artillery systems. The decision makes the UK the first Western power to supply main battle tanks to the country. Labour says the government has its fullest backing for sending military aid to Ukraine. Plans to house 400 asylum seekers in a small village near Northampton have now been dropped by the Home Office. Residents had objected to using the 17th century Highgate House Hotel in Cretan, which has a population of just 520. James Hill is the chairman of the local parish council. He told us why residents were against the scheme.
We're a village of 520 people, and the prospect of 400 people coming to live here without occupation or activities to keep them occupied, without proper access to local services, we felt that was unsustainable for us as a community and also for the local area.
Ministers are set to review guidance given to landlords who rent out social housing following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 after developing a respiratory condition caused by mould. Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, which owned the flat, had previously advised his parents to paint over it. Michael Gove says every landlord in the country needs to ensure that their tenants are housed in decent homes. Hormone replacement therapy could help prevent Alzheimer's disease in women, that's according to new research. The therapy could help control the symptoms of menopause and provide better memory and cognitive function for women who carry the Alzheimer's gene. Professor June Andrews is a dementia expert. She told us it's really too early to know how significant this could be.
Although the research indicates that there's some kind of link there, there's not anything yet to say that taking HRT is really going to prevent dementia. If it was going to prevent dementia, that would be really important. But the thing is, there's a chance that it might be associated with a reduction. And when you consider that taking HRT does present some risks and it has some side effects, it wouldn't be worth taking it just solely to prevent dementia.
The government says single-use plastic plates, trays and cutlery will be banned in England from October in a bid to curb the impact of plastic on the environment. At the moment, England uses around 2.7 billion pieces of single-use cutlery per year, and only 10% is recycled. Repeated breaches of this new legislation could lead to retailers and food vendors facing criminal charges. Dr. Christian Dunn is a senior lecturer in natural sciences at Bangor University. He told us why the ban is needed.
Plastic doesn't break down, doesn't decompose, doesn't rot away. And what happens to it is it breaks up into smaller and smaller pieces of plastics, which then become microplastics or even nanoplastics. And now what we're seeing is those plastics are so small and they're being found everywhere. They're in the rain, they're in the air that we're breathing in, they're even in our blood.
OK, you're watching GB News. More news as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Alistair.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. As promised, our second big conversation today is about the economy. According to the figures that were published yesterday, November's growth numbers, a UK recession is now in question. But what is the business reaction to all of that? What is the reality out there? A modest rise in economic activity certainly is going on, but there is still a little more gloom to be had further down the road. I'm delighted to say that joining me live in the studio are the business and finance editor of the Express newspapers group, Jeff Ho, the CEO of Mob Blocks and a former dragon, Piers Linney, and the owner of the Grill Shack and Tiki Bar, Wilfred Morris. Did you realise, as it was unfolding before your very eyes, that your sector was at the cutting edge of keeping this great country of ours just away from a recession?
Not at all, not at all.
Did it feel like that?
No, unfortunately not. For a small business like us, we didn't really feel any growth as such. But it's good news for the industry. It's good that we're talking about the hospitality sector again. We suffer a lot during COVID, even now with the cost of living as well. Rising cost of living is even more difficult now. So it's good that we see some growth, even though it's been associated to an event, to the World Cup.
Absolutely right. So the other thing we've got this from a lot of our viewers and listeners, and you tweeted about it yourself this morning, and that is we've got to be careful, you in print, us in broadcasting as well, about talking the bad stuff up. Because sentiment out there, as he's just said, amongst consumers and what have you, is really important. Has the fear of recession been overdone?
No, I don't actually think it has. If anything, I think it's been underplayed.
Oh, really?
The problem we have is that, yes, we saw growth, just a fraction, a smidgen of growth. But the problem is, in the run-up to Christmas, November and December, people borrowed lots and lots of money. If you look at the Bank of England figures, the last ones they put out, we saw credit card spending, for example, treble. So at some point, this bill has to be paid.
Sure.
And with the global economy slowing as well, I fear that we've just basically delayed recession.
OK, well, let me bring Piers in at that point, because your tweet, and I think it was this morning, it may have been last night, but I certainly spotted and thought, I'm talking to him tomorrow, was about the spectre of inflation being a real problem for folk out there. And the thing that struck me about it is that the Prime Minister chose to make restoration of growth and defeat of inflation twin priorities in that important New Year speech that he made. The Bank of England's chosen weapon to defeat inflation is higher interest rates, which for anyone trying to run a business or expand a business or invest in a new business is a nightmare.
Yeah, so they're saying it was going to be over 6%. Now I think they're looking at 4.39% is the forecast. We're at 3.5% now. So if you're already struggling, adding another point on top of that makes a huge difference. And I totally agree. I think that that kind of, the hiatus of the Queen's funeral, you've got Christmas bounce, the World Cup, people are out sort of putting their head in the sand, I think, to some extent, borrowing. That bill needs to be paid. So I think that it's not about cautious optimism. It's not about overplaying it. You've just got to be cautious, period.
Yeah. Is it still an environment, if you were in the den or on as you are, the Board of British Business, would you say to bright young people, and I read their ideas in the newspapers day in, day out, not least in your column and elsewhere. A lot of people have got brilliant ideas, whether it's setting up a new bar, new restaurant, or something in the high-tech sector. UK 2023 going into 2024 is still a place to risk your money, to risk a new venture, because that's what real growth is all about. It's not going out for a few beers and a meal on a credit card. It's actually creating growth. It's about creating wealth.
Yeah, I mean, we actually know each other. I've been to his restaurant. It's a very small world. So I always say that ambition is evenly distributed, OK? And maybe a bit more so in women and ethnic minorities because there's glass ceilings. But access to capital and opportunity isn't. That's what we need to fix. So a lot of what we're talking about now is, are we going to be in recession next quarter? You've got an election coming up. We've got to start looking beyond that. And we said this last time I was on sitting here with you, is you've got to have a plan for the country. There's probably a 5 or 10 year plan, not just sort of, shuffling around deck chairs or just worrying about what's going to happen the next quarter or even the next 18 months. That's what this country needs. Great place to start a business. And I think, I wasn't a fan of Brexit, but you are where you are. And I think that what we do have is an opportunity to make the UK, and you hear this a lot, but I believe in this, the best place to start or grow a business. And that's the key to this economy. Our economy is about to go through fundamental permanent change due to technology. We've seen this AI and ChatGPT. That's going to accelerate it. If we don't get our ducks in a row, the ship's going to leave the harbour and the UK isn't going to be on it.
Sure. That's the new stuff, which is all three of us would bellow hurrah from the top of the hill on that score. It's also reported in the financial press, I think you did a bit on it as well, but it's certainly in today's papers as well, and that is that the FTSE index of the top 100 companies in the UK, those prices are heading into record high territory. So I really want to say this with enormous pride and confidence. There is something good that's happening out there. It may be partly people sitting next to you. It may be people that you've invested in the past. And it may be people that you and I need to shout hurrahs about a little bit more. I mean, the FTSE index doesn't just go into record high territory because money men and women are playing silly games on arbitrage.
No, they don't. But what you need to remember is that the FTSE is, as an indicator, is actually rather bad. The FTSE 100 is actually mostly comprised of multinational companies who make most of their money from outside the UK. So if you're looking for
So you'd go for smaller companies like the 250
yes, you absolutely would.
And NASDAQ in America.
Absolutely would. And the other thing you need to remember as well about stock markets is that they're forward-thinking.
Sure.
So they tend to buy, you know, on a 12 to 18, 24, 36-month ahead time horizon. So they already believe, because they think stocks are low now, now's the time to buy, valuation-wise, ahead of any potential recovery, because by the time the economy's recovered, shares will be higher and it's too late to buy. You won't be making money.
I had a fascinating conversation right at the beginning of the programme with Catherine Forster, who's one of our brilliant political correspondents, and it was about the degree to which the Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng brigade are still out there arguing, and they want that lower taxation, smaller state agenda woven back into the Tory mantra. I wanted to ask something of all of you, coming at it from your different points of view, which I feel quite strongly. Are we now getting to a point where it may just be that we've exhausted what government can do directly for the economy and for us, and it is more, as you were just saying, people like the gentleman on your left who get out there, roll their sleeves out and do the job of work? Have we reached a ceiling on government intervention, whether it be the Conservatives or whether it be Labour waiting in the wings? What's your view, Jeff?
Yes, absolutely, and simply because if you look at Britain's national debt, it's over 2.4 trillion. There's no more money, to put it bluntly. You know, there's the old famous anecdote about when the government came in, the previous Chancellor left a note saying, sorry, there's no more money.
And I butt in merely to make the point, because both of you have spoken about it as well, and that is that isn't money for nothing.
No.
If Her Majesty's government on our collective behalf owes 2.x trillion pounds, interest has to be paid, and that interest, we were talking about interest rates and inflation, is even more than we spend on some important areas like defence, for example.
Indeed, absolutely. So what you'll find is that, unfortunately, austerity 2.0 is inevitable. It's going to happen. Certain things will just have to be cut. And this is the tricky thing for the government, because they've got to start prioritising and actually telling the public, sorry, you know, there is no more cash to spend on some of the things that you value. We're going to have to bootstrap ourselves and go from there.
Then I noticed while Ray was reading his news out, and he did that item on single-use plastics and forks and spoons and packaging, and you sat there as a restaurateur and someone, and I'm sure a lot of your mates are engaged in that. Do you feel that there are still too many burdens placed upon young men and women who want to try and get their own business off the ground, be it a restaurant, be it a bar, whatever it might be?
Yes. Well, thank you. We've got guys like Pierce, who's sitting here with me today, who's probably... It's been helping small businesses, entrepreneurs, to get them on the ladder. But now it's even more difficult with the climate that we are in. I think the question you were asking early on about how much the government can do. The government has done a lot during COVID. As a gentleman was saying as well, there is not much the government can do now. Probably the reason why we're sitting here, at least, is because of the war in Ukraine. That's where everything, the cost of living started to go up. So what the government can do, probably as one of the leader of the G7, probably is to find a solution to this war and trying to find some stability so we can see growth, sustainable growth in that sector, in the hospitality, in every sector, not just an eventful growth like we see with the World Cup. We don't have a World Cup every month. It would have been great, but that's not what the industry is needed. We're not there yet. So.
bearing, and I noticed you were listening very carefully, as indeed was I, but weave that together with what Jeff was saying just a few moments ago, that we may well have now hit a ceiling on what direct government intervention can do to help and support new businesses, young entrepreneurs, people that you speak for and pick and choose and try and back. If that is the case, does it not surprise you that the Conservative Party doesn't make more of the fact that it is now reaching that statute of limitations, and it will lay off people like Wilford and say, look, the real way forward for all of us is to ease red tape, to cut business rates and all of that stuff, and just create a direct climate where it makes sense and it makes money to create a new business and let your brilliant idea run?
Yes, I'm a huge believer in that the UK economy, there's a huge amount of talent and opportunity, potential baked within it, and we need to release it. I think we can probably grow, these are not exact numbers, obviously, we could probably grow our economy, GDP, by 10-15% just by releasing the opportunity and the talent within the economy. But to do that, you need access to capital, opportunities, need to be more evenly distributed. And I do agree that I think post-leaving the EU, we can reduce the sort of legislative burden. So, for example, government procurement's one that we've been looking at as well. And you see now reviews, Labour did a review recently, the startup review, so that came out. You're starting to see government realising that they do need to get out of the way. But let's face it, trying to, agree on tax fiscal policy, it's like four-dimensional chess. I don't envy anybody trying to do it. But we as an economy now have an opportunity to release the power within it and let people get on with it.
Do you think this is going to be the real debate come the general election, with Sir Keir Starmer standing up in front of the CBI not that long ago saying Labour now embraces growth, Labour embraces profit, Labour wishes to be the friend of business just as much?
I would like to think so, but the proof will be in the pudding. I think the problem with our political class is, quite frankly, they really don't have a clue. To grow an economy, you need to actually have a clear strategy. You actually need to put in place the conditions for economic growth. So, for example, Piers alluded to the regulatory burden. You need to actually go through the tax system. I mean, for example, business rate is an absolute massive killer. And no matter how many times a chancellor tinkers with it, it's still overly complicated. So you need to go away and do things like that. You need to fix education to actually make sure you have the people who are skilled enough to actually fill the jobs of tomorrow. And lastly, I don't think the government can do this alone. I think it's down to individuals changing their mentality. Britain needs to adopt a more entrepreneurial mindset. Far too many people are scared of failure. If you start a business, Piers will tell you about this, Wilford will tell you about this, you are working constantly. There is no days off. Your mind is focused. I've got to do this. I've got people relying on me. I need to keep going. There's no taking a break.
Where do you put business rates in terms of your, as it were, your top 10 of headaches that you have to deal with day in, day out?
It's up there. It's up there, Alistair. Business rates, you've got the lease, you've got the, all the overhead costs, but business rates is up there with,
The other thing that we got a lot of tweets and emails on has Rishi Sunak's fingerprints all over when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and that's corporation tax, and that move of this government to increase corporation tax, which seemed to survive that whole debacle over the Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng period. Is that something that concerns you, or are you in a position where you don't pay corporation tax, you pay personal income tax, business tax?
Yes, I do pay income tax, but going back to what you were saying earlier, Alistair, business rates, I think a number of businesses as well who took the bounce back loan. I don't know if you remember, a number of small businesses took it. I didn't take it back then because I didn't see the way I'm going to repay that business loan, for example. And now a number of businesses have to pay it back, and they have to pay business rates, even though they're not doing well. The industry, everything is slowing down in that industry. So that's why you can see a number of businesses now are closing, even where my restaurant is, in Acton. So we can see some people an increase in the footfall, but this is not, it's because some other businesses have closed.
Sure.
So I'm attracting those customers. So it's not a natural thing.
And whether it's business rates or whether it's corporation tax, within Sunak's 5 pledges that we talked about last weekend and we're talking about again this weekend, we made a little bit more progress on the health service, I'm delighted to say, with thumbs up from the private sector there. But it struck me listening to the Sunak speech that there was almost an internal contradiction to it, which is very, very tricky if you look at it from a business person's point of view. And that is that he wants to get growth going again. He also wants to defeat inflation that we've talked about. But he wants to reduce debt and start getting borrowing and debt as a smaller proportion of gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is what he and his business, day in, day out, produce and generate and contribute to, and the people that you back and support and help. Is it possible to have all three at the same time?
No, to be perfectly blunt. There's going to be a trade-off somewhere along the line, because if you go all out for growth, and, you know, say you give away a lot of tax giveaways to spur investment, then suddenly your borrowing goes through the roof. There's just simply going to have to be a bit of an adjustment, you know, expectations. And you've got to remember, we are at the mercy of the global economy as well. We are not operating in isolation. So, you know, if America, for example, goes into recession, the demand from American consumers for products made by us will massively go down. So to some degree, we are just simply riding along a ship, and we are just having to rearrange our chairs and our cargo loads to make ourselves as comfortable as possible.
Labour say that compared to those international competitors, and of course Jeff's absolutely right on that, Labour say that comparatively speaking, we're doing worse than many of those competitors post-COVID. They have bounced back more than we have. What, in your views, all three of you, but let's start with you, Piers, what have they done, whether it's France or Germany or the United States of America, that we haven't?
I think and is it the G20? We're probably just above Russia, which is not a great place to be. That's correct.
We've taken a hit on energy prices.
Well, there you go. Yes. So that's where we are. Yeah. And I think that it's partly historic. I mentioned the B word again. It's partly the impact of Brexit. We need to sort of fix that and have that conversation. So it's partly historic. It's partly the impact of leaving the EU. And again, I think the UK economy is pretty fragile in a way. So we're seeing all of that sort of compact and have this effect. And I'll keep beating the drum. We've got to start looking ahead, you know. China, for example, has got a demographic sort of bomb that's about to go off in terms of an upside-down demographic. Lots of other countries have. We've got to start looking further out in terms of the plan for this country. And, you know, there's 5.5 million small businesses in the UK. That's 60% of private sector employment, half of GDP. You know, large enterprises are shrinking. You know, you've got these big media companies, you've got, you know, GBNews now. Sure. You do the same thing with a lot less infrastructure, and that's the future, and that's what we should be focusing on.
So would your headline piece of advice then, to anyone who may be listening to this or watching this conversation and is just kind of mulling over creating their own business or working with friends and colleagues to do it, really take a detailed analytical view on what a competitor is doing better than us? Is there something that you and your colleagues could do that at the moment we have to turn to China for, or we have to turn to France or Germany for? Is it potentially as simple as that?
Well, the world's changing, and we forget that the cost of labour, for example, in Mexico, I think it's better trained, and it's about a third of the price. People don't realise that. So the whole, I mean, you make the correct point there. We are riding on the same, you know, we're all, you know, we all rise with the tide, or we sort of go down with it, depending where you are in the world. But the world is changing, and we have to keep up with that. You can't have this narrow focus on where are we going to be next quarter, with what we're talking about today in the press.
Absolutely.
Or even by the next election. You've got to look beyond that. And if you don't, we will continue to see opposition. Yeah. I think we'll become an also-ran.
There was another lovely line that came out when we celebrated the Pub of the Year with James a little bit earlier on, and that is, do what you do, but do it really, really well. And remember, nobody in the world is more important than your customer and your clientele. Pass that on?
Indeed, you're absolutely right. Spot on, Alistair. I think, well, Peace just touched it on the nail here, talking about Brexit. What we notice in the hospitality sector, after COVID, we had a mass wave of people who just left the UK, especially in the hospitality sector, where we're struggling as businesses to find the staff, the skillful people that we needed to support to keep the business going after COVID. But it was really a nightmare. So the customer service was going down, lack of staff, naturally. But somehow we still managed to stay above the water, if you want. But I don't know if it's what the long-term solution is. If it was part of the planning, like Peace was saying, from the government side of things, maybe they could have left probably a lead time after Brexit for people to remain in the UK before they start living.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much indeed. That delivered exactly what I hoped it would do. Some bright ideas for people out there and a little bit of background to what is really happening within the UK economy. Read those numbers, have a think about them, but always put them in context. And don't forget that sentiment really does matter. Thank you all very much indeed. Business and finance editor of Express Newspapers, Jeff Hu, CEO of Mob Blocks and former Dragon, Piers Linley, and also the owner of the Grill Shack and Tiki, the great Wilfred Maris. All welcome anytime, and thank you very much for breaking into your weekend to be here with us at GB News TV and radio. With plenty more still to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, including with the release of his memoir this week and public opinion declining. Can Prince Harry rebuild his royal reputation? I'll be speaking to a reputation expert next. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, after we lose the wind and rain today, a change is in the forecast. We will start to turn quite cold, especially from Sunday onwards. So here's the situation at the moment. We've still got low pressure dominating the British Isles, and the tightly packed isobars here indicating some very windy weather this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England. Quite blustery elsewhere, actually, and once we lose this rain across eastern England this afternoon, for much of England and Wales, Northern Ireland, really it's an afternoon of sunny spells and scattered showers. Very different story for Scotland. A band of persistent rain really lingering through most of the afternoon, and that rain will turn to hill snow across the mountains of Scotland. Quite cold here. Further south, we may just cling on to double figures throughout the afternoon in the far southeast. Into this evening, continuation of clear spells and showers for much of England and Wales. Further north, this band of rain and hill snow will slowly sink its way southwards into Northern Ireland and Northern England as the night goes on. Behind it, some clear skies developing, and under the clear skies it will turn quite cold, risk of some frost and also some icy stretches. Further south, a colder night than of late, but still probably hanging on to temperatures into 3 to 4 degrees. Into Sunday, a colder day for most of us. We will see this band of rain and maybe also some hill snow continue to track its way southwards, but weakening as it does so. Behind it, it does turn quite a good deal sunnier. Still the risk of some wintry showers and quite a keen wind across northeastern Scotland, so feeling quite cold here. Further south, a colder day than of late, but maybe nearer to average for the far south of England. And then as we go into the week ahead, it is going to be quite a cold week for most of us, an increase in risk of frost by night and also some snow.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online, this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
(32 minutes past 1). I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The UK has sanctioned Iran's Prosecutor General following the execution of a British-Iranian national in Iran. Ali Reza Akbari was sentenced to death on charges of spying for Britain. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the sanctions underline our disgust at the killing, which Rishi Sunak described as callous and cowardly. Meanwhile, Iran's state media is reporting that the British ambassador has been summoned to Iran's foreign ministry over what it describes as London's meddling in national security. A union representing ambulance workers has written to the Prime Minister saying they feel betrayed by attempts to paint them as uncaring. GMB, which represents more than 10,000 ambulance staff, told the Prime Minister he was demonising them over strike action. Comes after Mr Sunak told the Commons that industrial action was terrifying the public. Rishi Sunak has spoken of his ambition to send a squadron of British tanks to help Ukraine take back territory lost to Russian forces. Speaking with President Zelensky this morning, he pledged to supply Challenger 2 battle tanks alongside additional artillery systems. The decision makes the UK the first Western power to supply main battle tanks to the country. Labour says the government has its fullest backing for sending military aid to Ukraine. Plans to house 400 asylum seekers in a small village near Northampton have now been dropped by the Home Office. Residents had objected to using the 17th century Highgate House Hotel in Cretan, which has a population of just 520. James Hill is the chairman of the local parish council. He told us why residents were against the scheme.
We're a village of 520 people, and the prospect of 400 people coming to live here without occupation or activities to keep them occupied, without proper access to local services, we felt that was unsustainable for us as a community and also for the local area.
We're on TV, online and on DAB Plus Radio. You're watching GB News, the People's Channel. Back now to Alistair.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. Finally, you may have noticed Spare is out and about. It is the fastest-selling non-fiction book, though definitions may vary in certain quarters. In a succession of TV interviews on both sides of the Atlantic, the author, Prince Harry, sought to defend himself and even hold out the hope of reconciliation. But many felt that the game was up, not least on his own reputation. In a major interview in the Daily Telegraph today, Harry suggests, and there it is, flashing on the front page, I'm just holding up the Telegraph there, that there may be so much that he left out of the first book in respect to his father and to his big brother, that there may be a second book waiting. Might that be the way to try and rebuild the reputation, or is it a lost cause? There's also something, if you're interested in all of this stuff, and we know from our own research and data that you are, that both the Sun newspaper and the Daily Express have big opinion polls on what you think of what Harry did and what he has had to say, and what you now think of the rest of the royal family. And oddly enough, if I just hold up quickly a sampler from the Express, there it is, picture of King Charles III, and it says, "Don't worry, Your Maj, the nation is still with you." So there we have it. The book appears to have won him few friends. And I'm delighted to be joined now by Andy Williams, who is a political and royal reputational expert on it. Most seem to regard him simply as having been irresponsible in military terms, disloyal to his family, breaching confidence left, right and centre. And according to those polls in The Sun and The Express, he's blown it.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Alistair, I think his reputation has undoubtedly suffered as a result of this. We know from the polls that we've seen that Harry's reputation is his popularity is at an all-time low, his and Meghan's popularity. But I think the key thing here is that I don't think he's actually bothered by what the UK public think of him. This isn't an exercise, I don't think, in trying to get the British people on side. I think it's an exercise in trying to put his case forward in terms of how he perceives the media have played a very damaging role in his life, and the perceived or the alleged way in which the, as he calls it, the institution has behaved. So I don't think he's actually trying to recover his reputation here in the UK. I think what Harry is trying to do is put forward a case, put forward an argument, gain some level of retribution, I suppose. And also, I think the third thing is appeal to an American audience.
Yeah.
So if you look at the interviews that Harry has given, the two, one in the US, one in the UK with Tom Bradby on ITV last week, and also the interview that him and Meghan gave to Oprah Winfrey last year, all of those interviews have been designed to appeal to an American audience, not a UK audience, because that, I think, is where their future lies.
Interestingly, in the interview with Bryony Gordon in The Telegraph, he makes exactly that penultimate point, that it is the media who are the enemy. They did for his mum, they tried to do for him, and they tried to do for Meghan. Is there any way in which a second volume of Spare could rectify any of that? Or would you, as a professional consultant, say, as once was famously said to a leading Labour politician, a little bit of silence would not go amiss?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if once all of the promotion around this book is done, and I mean, let's be clear, the job he has done or the job his people have done in terms of promoting this book has been exceptional. It's been dominating the news for a week now. I think I've seen that the sales of his book is one of the fastest selling non-fiction books of all time. So in that respect, it served his purpose. I wouldn't be surprised whether after this there is a period of silence, because there will come a sort of saturation point at which people do get fed up of hearing about this. I guess what's interesting and somewhat forces the issue is that in 5 months' time, we have the coronation coming up. And a decision has to be made between Harry and his father, the king, as to whether or not he's going to attend that coronation, very important symbolic event. And then if he does attend, in what capacity? How will he behave? Will he be speaking publicly around that? And, you know, it's not that far away. So while there might be a period of silence, there will be a proactive decision that has to be made one way or the other as to whether or not he attends. And that, I think, will say something about whether or not the family has reconciled at all, whether Harry is prepared to put aside his grievances that he has so openly and quite brutally really laid out in the book.
As the late Queen's relationship with the Duke of York demonstrated, it's a family that is capable of forgiveness in the right circumstances and the right imagery. Really good to talk to you. Thank you very, very much indeed, Ali there. Ali Williams, who expert for Penta on reputation building, both in the world of politics and indeed for the royal family. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Hope very much indeed that you will come back and talk to us again. Now, let's switch to another of our topics that you seem to like, which is the idea of trying to save money and make each pound go a little bit further. An estimated 3.2 million people across Britain ran out of credit on their prepayment meters last year, that according to the Citizens' Advice. And we will be discussing that next. But first, let's take a quick break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm bold enough to say another popular regular feature on this programme is Saturday Savings. As I said just before that break, an estimated 3.2 million people across Britain ran out of credit on their prepayment meters last year, and that's one person every 10 seconds, according to Citizens Advice. People could not afford to top it up. Now, with energy firms attempting to switch customers over to repayment meters, what can you do if this is currently affecting you? I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Sate again, who is, there he is, CEO and founder of Save Money, Cut Carbon. I mean, there's some brutal economics in this, but also there's a kind of freedom and liberty thing, people just doing it to unwilling consumers. Citizens Advice are on the case. What would you suggest people should do who are unhappy about both sides of that coin?
Alistair, great to invite you back on your show, I think, to talk about the reports of this really, I think, disturbing practice, so that people are using the energy crisis as potentially a tool of moving more and more of the most vulnerable and struggling households onto prepaid meters. And to be blunt, I think simply this, it just improves the profits and the cash collection of our energy companies. So I think it's very, very disturbing. And as you said, some big numbers, 3.2 million people disconnected last year. As you said, 1 every 10 seconds. A lot more people being taken to court so that they can force their way into the home and change the meters. And more worrying for me is the big drive with TV advertising, with people dressing up as Einstein to get us to go to smart meters, because the beauty of the smart meter from an energy company's point of view is they don't even have the cost and the time of taking to court. They can just flick a switch and you're on prepaid many times without the individual even knowing at some of the most stressful times. So, you kind of look at people that were forced to go across, 600,000 people, I think Citizen Advice said, in 2022 versus 380,000 in 2021. So a really big uplift. And that's, leaving 2 million people disconnected at least once a month for more than 24 hours, unable to cook or wash or heat or turn a light on. So it's really, really disturbing.
Yeah, fascinating. And go onto his website or Citizens Advice and see what your rights are, because, as Mark just said, you have rights in this matter and don't be knocked about. Absolutely. The headline element of it about folk running out of credit is still all about price. I know you follow these things very carefully, not only just on the carbon dimension to it, but generally speaking. Do you sense, and I'll dare to say it, that on wholesale prices of energy, we may just possibly have turned a corner, and that there may be some slightly sunny uplands ahead of us on price?
Well, I think that is the case, but I think it's a long-term play, and it is supply and demand around the world, and wholesale prices are starting to drop. slowly, but they're not dropping down to what we were experiencing on our energy prices, years gone by. So this problem isn't going to go away. And I think we kind of need to smell up and, kind of wake up and smell the coffee a little bit. In general, all businesses are in business to make money. They want to sell their commodity, they want to collect the cash as quickly as possible, and they want to make a profit. And energy companies are no different. Shareholders, CEOs, right the people down to speak on the help desk, they're there to make you use more energy and to make more money. And I think they're the wrong people to guide us and help us reduce what we actually use. And I think it's now time to really sit up and look at different ways of doing this. In my view, to solve this problem for the most vulnerable people, they should be taking these people on prepaid meters away from the energy companies, actually threaten the energy companies. If you are to put them on a prepaid meter, we will take them off, and they should be moved into a not-for-profit organisation that potentially could buy all of the energy for 4 million people in the UK from green sources. They should remove that profit element and deliver, if you like, that credit directly onto the meter of the people most in need. And obviously, I would say this at Save Money Cut Carbon, we're growing rapidly with people downloading our free app to look at things they can do in the home and buy products to reduce what they actually use. But I go back to that statement, an energy company does not want you to reduce what you actually use in energy. It's like asking Tesco's and Sainsbury's to tell you to buy less things when you walk around their shop. They're never going to do that. And I think we should start with these most vulnerable people. And this could be the trigger for not only moving them away, moving the profit away, if you like, in supplying the energy, but also picking their homes first to do what Save Money Cut Carbon does, is actually put in the energy efficient products and technologies which don't cost a lot. So the money that's on their meter goes further and further and further.
And ultimately saves us money. Mark, always wise. Thank you very much indeed for joining us again. That's Mark Sate there, the CEO and founder of Save Money Cut Carbon. Look up the website, lots of great ideas there, as you said. These businesses exist to make money. Can't blame them for that. That's what they do. Your job is to try and save money, but also to remember your rights as well. I hope that you found that all very useful, as indeed did I. Now, change the subject completely. This week, the death of legendary guitarist Jeff Beck was announced. He was hailed by those who really know about these things as certainly one of the all-time great guitarists, and some even argued that he was the greatest, bearing in mind that he shared some pedigree with Eric Clapton, who many others have said really was the greatest. What's interesting is that he was mourned publicly not by one member of the Rolling Stones, but by two of them. In a tweet, Mick Jagger said, "With the death of Jeff Beck, we have lost a wonderful man and one of the greatest guitar players in the world. We will all miss him so much." So let's reflect upon the career of this legend. I'm delighted to say that joining me now once again is a very dear friend of mine, UK artist manager Nick Stewart. There he is. To be brutally honest, Jeff Beck, outside the profession, as it were, is not an instantly standout name on the high street like Eric Clapton or others. Nick?
Well, good point, Alistair. To the great public, Jeff Beck only ever had one hit single, Hi Ho Silver Lining, which has been adopted, as I learned this week, was adopted by various football clubs, including West Bromwich Albion. It was a sort of early version of Sweet Caroline, I think, in some ways. No, Jeff Beck was a remarkable man, and this little story really is about a group called the Yardbirds. And the Yardbirds contained, at any stage, from 63 to 65, Eric Clapton. Jimmy Page was then asked to join. He said, "I've got too much going on with my session work, so why don't you take on Jeff Beck?" But Page did join the Yardbirds, and the Yardbirds they were a blues band. They supported Sonny Bill Williamson on an English tour, and they became the first sort of psychedelic rock band. And from the Yardbirds came Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, Paul Samuel Smith, who was the bass player, went on to produce all those Cat Stevens albums. And then Jeff went off to start the Jeff Beck group with Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood and Ainsley Dunbar. And it was a turning point. And what this unfortunate, untimely departure of Beck, who was a brilliant guitar player.
Yeah.
I quickly tell you that I spoke to Phil Manzanera, Roxy Music's guitar player, who said unequivocally he was the best he ever saw. Absolutely the best he ever saw. But that melting point of 65 to 68 produced the English psychedelic rock scene headed by Led Zeppelin. Clapton came back with Cream. Jeff was on tour with Rod Stewart in America on The Truth. He was an extremely integral, very influential figure in English progressive rock, and then went on to work with various other people and was on many, many great records. For example, not many people know, the guitar solo in Tina Turner's Private Dancer is played by Jeff Beck.
Final point quickly, and I'm afraid time is slightly against us. My favourite quote in all of it was Rod Stewart said, unlike many guitarists, he actually listened to what I was trying to sing.
Well, the combination of... I never really understood why Truth and Beck-Ola, the two albums that the Jeff Beck group made with Rod Stewart, I commend to anyone listening to this, go and listen to Rod Stewart, I've Been Drinking. It's one of Rod's great vocal performances and set him in motion through the Faces and then his own solo career. Jeff Beck,
great to talk to you.
Incredibly important.
Thank you for your thoughts and reflections and time. As always, my go-to friend on popular music, Nick Stewart there. Thank you very much indeed on the great Jeff Beck, who passed away. And reflections there of his collaboration from Nick Stewart, UK artist manager, who is one of those been there and done it all, guys. I said just before we did the savings item that it was one of our more popular items, which we regularly try and weave in. We know that because we talk to you and we listen to what you have to say. And our next chunk is also one that you particularly like. It's what we call the Good Causes slot, where we try and highlight groups or individuals who are doing good things for other people. This week, I'm delighted to welcome into the studio, and she's sitting right next to me live in the studio, Madeleine Castry, who is the founder of Resonate. Your mum and dad were both coppers.
Yes.
So tell me, in a nutshell, what does Resonate seek to do? I know the answer to the question because I've read all the notes on it, but in your own words.
Of course. So Resonate seeks to change lives with music. Music has a profoundly positive impact on health and well-being, and it's basically to get everyone involved in music and singing to do just that, with special focus on people living with severe disability.
And it can be music like Rod Stewart or Jeff Beck or whatever, or it can be classical music.
Absolutely.
And we know that there is that wonderful connection between music and well-being. People have been doing that for quite some time. But I read in the notes that one of your real standout hopes is Parkinson's.
Yes, absolutely. A good friend of mine was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and with Parkinson's there's over 40 different symptoms, and people think it's just that shake, but it isn't. There's lots and lots of different vocal impacts with Parkinson's, and you can lose the clarity of your voice, you can lose the connection to the breath, and this is prevalent in lots of other disabilities too. So with my friend, I started to use my singing background to help her regain some clarity.
You're an academic, PhD, aren't you?
Yes, just about to finish my PhD. Don't want to jinx it. But yes, I'm using all of my background to really shape this initiative to make music.
Well, it's been lovely to meet you. All too brief, as I said to my lovely old friend Nick Stewart, you're my new friend. I hope very much you'll come back and talk to us again, particularly about that connection with Parkinson's. And thank you very much indeed. Lovely to see you there. So that, I'm afraid, all we have time for in this... in that conversation, but don't forget what I was just saying there, particularly about Parkinson's and well-being. The Prime Minister said he wants bold and radical action on the NHS. Well, there's a good idea. Let's get Madeleine in there to help out on that. Madeleine Castry, the founder of Resonate. But that, I'm afraid, is all that she and I have time for, and indeed all that I have time for today on the programme. But I will be back again tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and I hope very much indeed that you will join me then, and I hope, Madeleine, you'll come back and have another conversation with me at your convenience. But from all of us here, for now, have a terrific Saturday and a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, after we lose the wind and rain today, a change is in the forecast. We will start to turn quite cold, especially from Sunday onwards. So here's the situation at the moment. We've still got low pressure dominating the British Isles, and the tightly packed isobars here indicating some very windy weather this afternoon across parts of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England. Quite blustery elsewhere, actually, and once we lose this rain across eastern England this afternoon, for much of England and Wales, Northern Ireland, really it's an afternoon of sunny spells and scattered showers. Very different story for